What event in your life still messes with you to this day? Story 1. My ex-wife and I went through a miscarriage during our marriage, and it was one of the most painful experiences of my life. Not long after, she filed for divorce. I tried to heal and move on, but for the first 3 years following the end of our marriage, she would send me a message on the anniversary of our miscarriage. Every year, like clockwork, she'd text me something cruel, thanking me for what she called the worst experience of her life. She'd say how grateful she was that she didn't end up having a child with me. I don't have feelings for her anymore, and I've accepted that we were not meant to be parents together. But I still can't understand how someone could be so cold and vindictive. The emotional scars from that level of intentional cruelty remain. It's not about still loving her. It's about the shock of how far someone can go to hurt another person. Story 2. During my first year of college, I took on the full-time responsibility of caring for my grandmother, who had severe Alzheimer's. It was a time in my life that was supposed to be filled with learning, growth, and new beginnings, but instead, it was weighed down by the heavy burden of caregiving. I had to juggle classes, assignments, and exams while also bathing, feeding, and watching over someone who no longer recognized me. There were moments I felt like I was drowning emotionally, physically, and mentally. I'm grateful that I've recovered, at least physically, from that period, but I don't think I'll ever forget how emotionally drained I was. It felt like I lost my grandmother long before she actually passed, like the person I loved had been replaced by someone else entirely. Story 3. From the ages of 15 to 18, I spent every summer taking care of my grandfather, who had severe dementia. My parents handled things during the school year, but as soon as summer hit, it became my responsibility. In my culture, we are expected to care for our elders. It's our duty. So I did it. I helped feed him, clean him, and manage his outbursts. But it was the emotional toll that really got to me. The man who once told me stories and gave me advice had turned into someone unrecognizable, angry, confused, and often cruel. There were moments I wished I could just disappear. I felt completely numb inside, like I had to shut off parts of myself to survive each day. Looking back, I don't regret doing what I did, but I do remember how empty I felt. It changed me. It aged me. Story 4. I broke my spine. What they don't tell you about a life-altering injury like that is how isolating it becomes. The physical pain is intense, yes, but the emotional aftermath is worse. Suddenly, people stop checking in. No one calls, no one texts, unless they need something. It's as if I vanished. I'm only 22, and I feel like a ghost. Even Pizza Hut texts me more often than my own friends or relatives. The silence is deafening. When depression really hits, I realize that if I were to take my own life, it might be weeks or even months before anyone noticed. Maybe my social worker would eventually realize something was wrong and come check on me. That thought alone messes with me more than the injury ever could. Story 5. My father was dying of cancer and had been placed in hospice care. He had stopped eating, barely spoke, and we were told the end was near. My mom and I visited him every day to make sure he wasn't alone. One morning, our phone rang. Dreading the worst, I answered. But it wasn't bad news. My father was on the line. He sounded better than he had in weeks. He said he was hungry and excited to see us. I was overwhelmed, thinking maybe we were witnessing a miracle. I jumped in the car and started driving to him. Midway there, the hospice called again. This time it was what I had feared. He had just passed away. That morning still haunts me. I questioned my memory. Did I imagine the call? I met with the hospice nurse, and she gently explained the concept of terminal lucidity. It's when someone briefly becomes alert right before death. That helped me understand, but the emotional whiplash from that day still lingers. Story 6. My mom had terminal cancer and hadn't eaten for days. She slipped in and out of consciousness, and every moment felt like it could be the last. Then one day she suddenly woke up. She was fully alert and asked, of all things, for a root beer float. We rushed to get it for her, desperate to give her something, anything, that might bring her joy. She drank it, smiled, and talked with us like her old self. It felt like a small miracle, a sliver of hope piercing through the darkness. We thought maybe, just maybe, she was turning a corner. But that moment was fleeting. She passed shortly after. I later learned about terminal lucidity and how it's common before death. It didn't make it any less heartbreaking. That day stays with me, her smile, the way she laughed, the float in her hand. It was her last gift to us, and it was both beautiful and devastating. Story 7. My best friend faked having terminal cancer. He went all in, hospital stays, fake phone calls from doctors, the whole thing. For nearly 2 weeks, I thought he was going to die. I mentally prepared myself to say goodbye to the person who meant more to me than anyone else. I cried. I prayed. I checked in constantly. And then just like that, it unraveled. He wasn't sick. It was all a lie. When I confronted him, he said he'd explain everything soon. But he never did. He blocked me on everything and vanished. That was 2 years ago, and I still can't fully process it. I feel stupid, betrayed, and emotionally wrecked. I'd already lost a childhood friend a few months earlier, so when this happened, it shattered what little trust one had left. Story 8. I was asleep when I woke to the strange sound of humming and giggling. I looked over and saw my husband in bed, completely unresponsive, flapping his arms like he was in some kind of trance. He wasn't a drug user, and I had just returned from a 2-week work trip. I noticed he had been acting odd, rhyming words, being distracted, but this was on another level. I called 911. Paramedics came, and his blood pressure was dangerously high. At the hospital, he began yelling at me, took off his wedding ring, and said he never wanted to see me again. That's when the nurse pulled me aside and explained he was in a full-blown manic and psychotic episode. Bipolar disorder. They admitted him involuntarily, and I spent weeks grieving as if he had died. Watching the person you love become someone else entirely is terrifying. Thankfully, 2 years later, he's stable and back to himself. We've worked through it. Story 9. For nearly 20 years, I was a volunteer search and rescue canine handler. One of our final missions was for a 13-year-old girl who never made it home from the bus stop. My dog picked up her trail, and we followed it deep into the woods, to a serene cliffside near a quarry. That's where we found her. She had hung herself. Her shoes were neatly placed at the edge, her sweatshirt folded beside them. It was clear this had been planned. That image is burned into my memory. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see it like it just happened. I have a daughter now, and the thought of her going through something like that terrifies me. I went through critical incident stress debriefing, and I've processed a lot of it, but some memories stay with you forever. They become part of who you are. Story 10. When I was a kid, I got a birthday invitation from a classmate. It was handwritten and handed to me directly. I was excited. Finally, I was invited to something. But when I showed up to the party, everything fell apart. He acted like he didn't know me. In front of everyone, he asked to see the invitation, then claimed he never wrote it. He said I invited myself. I was humiliated. All the other kids laughed or stared silently. I wanted to leave, but my mom had already dropped me off. So I explained to his mom what happened. Thankfully, she recognized his handwriting and was clearly disappointed in him. She gave me some lamingtons and a soda and let me play video games alone until my mom came back. That day changed how I looked at my classmates. I realized none of them were actually my friends. Story 11. For my 16th birthday, I invited around 7 or 8 of my closest friends from school. I was really looking forward to it, thinking it would be a night of laughs, cake, and good memories. But the evening arrived, and no one showed up. No calls, no messages, just silence. I sat there, staring at the decorations and snacks I had set out, slowly realizing that I'd been stood up. I ended up calling a couple of them afterward, and they admitted they forgot or had other plans. Some felt guilty and came over later, but by then the damage was done. I don't know what hurt more, the fact no one came, or that when a few finally did, it felt like they were there out of pity. That disappointment still stings, even though it happened years ago. It taught me not to expect much from people, even the ones who say they care. Birthdays have never felt the same since. Story 12. The morning my husband died is still etched into my memory. It's been almost 3 years, and not a single day has passed without some trace of that pain. I remember waking up to the silence, the stillness, and the unbearable realization that he was gone. We had built a life together, shared routines, meals, and dreams. Suddenly, all of that vanished. Cooking was one of our favorite things to do together. I couldn't bring myself to do it for the longest time. Another person shared that they lost their spouse around the same time and only recently returned to cooking. I understood that completely. I'm nearing 40 now and feel no desire to celebrate birthdays or milestones. He was the only person I ever wanted to grow old with. Now I just try to get through each day. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. It sits beside you, quietly reshaping everything. And even when people think you've moved on, you know that a part of you never really will. Story 13. Losing a child to SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, is a kind of pain that fractures you permanently. One night, everything was fine. Everyone was asleep. Then morning came, and our baby was gone. Just like that. I haven't slept properly since. Insomnia is a constant, and medication is the only reason I get any rest at all. Another parent shared a similar experience, and I realized how common PTSD is among those who've lost a child this way. It changes you. Your life becomes divided into before and after. Even years later, the sound of a crying baby can trigger a wave of panic and sorrow that hits without warning. It's been almost 8 years for me. I've lost other loved ones since, including both of my parents, but none of those losses came close to the devastation of losing my son. I still avoid baby aisles in stores. I still don't watch the news because I can't handle seeing more loss. That kind of grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry. Story 14. When I was 5 years old, my mom shot herself. For most of my life, I thought I had moved past it. But during a therapy session recently, I realized I hadn't. I had blamed myself all these years, thinking maybe if I had been a better kid, she wouldn't have done it. That guilt was reinforced by my stepmother, who once told me, "No wonder your mother killed herself." That sentence stuck with me like a scar. I tried to rationalize her cruelty, but it crushed something inside me. In 2017, I lost 2 of my sisters and moved back home to take care of my stepmother until she died in 2023. She never changed. She was bitter and mean until the end. Processing that pain has been difficult. I'm starting to accept that I wasn't to blame. Talking about it has helped, but I still carry that little kid inside me, the one who thought he was unlovable. I'm learning to forgive myself, even if I can't forgive everyone else. Story 15. When I was a kid, I was molested. At the time, I didn't think it was that traumatic. I thought I had somehow gotten lucky compared to what others went through. But now, almost 30, I see how deeply it affected me. I have a complicated relationship with sex and intimacy. I used to think using sex to defuse conflict or create false closeness was normal. It wasn't. Therapy helped me realize that these patterns were rooted in trauma, something I hadn't even fully acknowledged until my late 20s. One day it just clicked. I had been molested. From there, everything started to make sense. The boundary issues, the shame, the inability to connect in healthy ways. Healing takes time, and these realizations come in waves, but I've learned that ignoring it only makes it worse. I wish I'd recognized the signs earlier, but I'm grateful I understand it now. I'm working on reclaiming a part of myself that was stolen. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Story 16. When I was 16, I hadn't heard from my dad in a while. Out of nowhere, my uncle showed up at our house with shocking news. My dad had a stroke and was in a coma. Since my parents were divorced, my mom was technically next of kin, so he wanted her to help make decisions. Things got even weirder when my dad's old roommate showed up later, gave a slightly different story, and then hit on my mom. When we finally made it to the hospital, my dad was barely recognizable, bruised, swollen, and hooked to machines. He'd been there for a week, and no one had told us. We found blood and human waste in his house, which didn't match the "he fell down the stairs" story. The police didn't care. No investigation. Nothing. After 3 months in a coma and nearly a year in rehab, he recovered. But I still can't shake the secrecy, the urgency to pull the plug, or the feeling that something terrible happened, and my family helped cover it up. Story 17. When I was a kid, one of my best friends told me she wouldn't be having a birthday party that year because her family had a big expense. I felt terrible for her, so I broke into my savings, did extra chores, and bought her a Furby, plus her favorite candy. I even paid for professional wrapping. On the day of her non-party, I wheeled a little wagon to her house, only to find a full-blown party in progress with all our classmates. She looked shocked to see me. When she opened the door, the other kids chimed in. "Hey, you made it after all." That's when I realized I wasn't supposed to be there. I had been lied to and excluded. Later, I found out she had recently become popular and didn't want to be associated with someone uncool. She never spoke to me again. I never got the Furby back. That day broke something in me, a kind of trust or innocence. I learned people can be incredibly cruel, even when you give them your whole heart. Story 18. I lost my dad about a year ago. Recently, I had my first dream with him in it, and I broke down crying in the dream. I don't think I've ever cried in a dream before. That moment hit me with a wave of grief I didn't know was still that strong. When he died, the news came suddenly. My mom and a neighbor tried to save him, but they couldn't. She told me the story of what happened in great detail, so many times, in fact, that I now have false memories. Every day, at some random point, those memories invade my mind. Sometimes it's the moment I got the phone call. Sometimes it's walking into the house. Sometimes it's standing in the kitchen with the undertaker, while my dad's body lay just a few feet away. These flashbacks feel real, and they're exhausting. I thought I'd be okay by now, but in truth, I'm still not. I'm living with an open wound that hasn't closed. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. It just stays where it wants. Story 19. At 15, I had 2 metal rods and 14 screws surgically implanted in my spine. It was a 12-level spinal fusion, and the pain was unimaginable, especially because a medication error meant I didn't receive morphine for the first 24 hours. Years later, at 21, I was working in a hospital when a 400-pound patient began sliding off a bed. Instinctively, I tried to catch her upper body. That moment ruined everything. One of the steel rods snapped, a screw broke, and even the fused bone cracked in 2 places. The pain was excruciating, but the worst part was the neglect by the workman's comp doctor, who never reviewed my x-rays. It took 2 years and multiple ER visits before the true damage was discovered. I had another surgery, but it left me permanently impaired. I lost 80% of my work capability. That was 14 years ago, and I still limp. I can't mow the lawn without pain, let alone work full-time. One split-second decision cost me nearly everything. No job is worth that. Story 20. I had a friend struggling with depression. I saw the signs: withdrawal, sadness, silence, but I assumed someone else was helping. I figured he had support. I was wrong. He wrote me a letter before taking his life, telling me I was his best friend and that he wished I had done more. I didn't. I ignored my instincts, and now he's gone. That letter broke me. It still does. I think about all the times I could have called, listened, or just showed up, but I didn't. I thought I had time. I thought he'd pull through. I was wrong. That guilt doesn't fade. It just settles into your bones, reminds you every now and then that sometimes doing nothing does real harm. I'll never brush off someone's pain again. I learned the hard way that silence can be deadly. If you think someone might be hurting, say something. You might be the only one who does. Story 21. I was 10 when I first realized something was wrong with my older brother. He was 17 and had started talking to himself in whispers, locking himself in his room for hours. My parents chalked it up to teenage rebellion, but by the time I was 14, he'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia. What followed were years of watching someone I loved disappear into a world of paranoia and hallucinations. He'd accuse me of stealing his thoughts or planting cameras in the walls. It was terrifying. One night, during a particularly bad episode, he chased me through the house with a kitchen knife because he thought I was a government agent. He didn't hurt me, but I've never felt safe in that house since. He's now institutionalized, and I visit occasionally, but I grieve for someone who's technically still alive. I don't talk about it much because people don't understand. They either pity me or change the subject. What hurts most is knowing he's still in there somewhere. My big brother, the one who used to make up stories and teach me how to draw. But I haven't seen him in years. I don't think I ever really will again. Story 22. When I was in middle school, I had a gym teacher who regularly humiliated me. I was overweight, shy, and terrible at sports. During class, he'd loudly point out my mistakes, roll his eyes when I couldn't climb the rope, and once made me run a lap by myself while the rest of the class watched because I was holding everyone back. I remember the burning shame in my chest, gasping for breath as everyone laughed. It didn't stop there. He'd make comments about my weight in front of other teachers, and even told my parents during a conference that I needed to man up and stop crying all the time. I stopped eating lunch at school. I begged to skip gym class. My confidence was shattered before I even hit puberty. To this day, I struggle with my body image and self-worth. I know it was years ago, and I've done therapy, but one person's cruelty during such a formative time left scars that still ache. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thought about what he did to me. If he ever felt guilty. Probably not. People like that rarely do. Story 23. I had a miscarriage when I was 11 weeks pregnant. It was my first pregnancy, and we had already picked out names. My husband and I had just told our parents, and I had started buying little onesies online. Then one morning I woke up in pain. By the time I got to the hospital, the doctor confirmed what I already knew deep down. That kind of loss is invisible to most people. Afterward, everyone said things like, "At least it was early," or "You can try again." I know they meant well, but it felt like they were brushing it off. Like it didn't matter. But it did. That baby was real to me. I had imagined holding them, rocking them to sleep, reading books together. All of it vanished in a matter of hours. My husband grieved differently, quietly, almost distantly. I felt alone in my sadness, surrounded by people who didn't understand why I couldn't just move on. It's been 3 years. I'm pregnant again now, but I still think about the baby I lost. They were here, even if only for a short time, and they'll always be part of me. Story 24. I was an only child, and my mom was my best friend. She raised me on her own, worked 2 jobs, and still managed to make me feel like the most important person in her world. When she was diagnosed with ALS, I thought we had more time, but it moved fast. Within months, she couldn't speak clearly or walk without help. I became her caregiver at 22, feeding her, bathing her, helping her use the bathroom. The worst part wasn't the physical toll. It was watching her mind stay sharp while her body failed her. She would cry silently, unable to wipe her own tears. She died at home, in my arms. I held her hand until the end. It's been 5 years, and I still wake up expecting to hear her call my name. I still reach for my phone to text her. Grief is strange like that. It doesn't follow logic. People say I was strong, but I don't feel strong. I feel like I lost the one person who understood me completely. And in some ways I did. Story 25. I came out as bisexual to my family when I was 19. I knew it wouldn't be easy. My parents were conservative and religious, but I thought they'd at least try to understand. Instead, they kicked me out. No warning, no discussion. Just a suitcase left on the porch and a text message from my dad that read, "You made your choice." I couch surfed for a while, staying with friends, sometimes sleeping in my car. I worked 2 jobs and tried to keep up with school, but eventually I dropped out. I struggled with anxiety and depression, constantly questioning if I had made a mistake. I missed birthdays, holidays, even funerals because I wasn't welcome. Over time, I built a new life. I found a chosen family, friends who love me for who I am. I'm stable now, but that rejection, it still hurts. Every time I hear someone talk about how family is everything, I flinch a little. Because mine wasn't. Sometimes blood doesn't mean love. Sometimes it means starting over, alone. Story 26. I had a panic attack during my wedding ceremony. Everything looked perfect, the flowers, the music, the dress. But right as I was about to say, "I do," something in me froze. My heart started pounding, and I couldn't breathe. I looked at my fiancé and felt this wave of dread. Not because I didn't love him, but because I suddenly realized I was doing this for the wrong reasons. I was trying to fix myself through him, hoping that by becoming someone's wife, I'd finally feel whole. I excused myself, ran to the bathroom, and cried harder than I ever had. I pulled myself together and went through with it, thinking the feeling would pass. It didn't. We divorced 2 years later. He was kind, patient, and didn't deserve the emotional distance I brought into the marriage. I've never told him about that moment at the altar. I still feel guilty. Sometimes we want so badly to be okay, we pretend we are, until the truth crashes through anyway. Story 27. My younger sister was born with a rare genetic disorder. I was 8 when she came home from the hospital, fragile and hooked up to machines. My parents focused all their energy on keeping her alive, which meant I became invisible. I understood, but it still hurt. I went to school alone, celebrated birthdays quietly, and learned to cook my own meals before I turned 10. By the time I hit my teenage years, I was more like a third caregiver than a sibling. I loved her deeply, but I also resented the life I had to give up. When she passed away at 12, I felt a confusing mix of sorrow and relief. I hated myself for it. I still do sometimes. I've never talked openly about it, not even to my parents. They lost a daughter. I lost a sister, a childhood, and parts of myself I'm still trying to find. Grief is messy. It doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like silence, like guilt, like growing up way too fast. Story 28. I was assaulted by someone I considered a friend. We were both in grad school, had the same classes, and often studied together. One night, after too many drinks, I passed out on his couch. I woke up hours later to him touching me. I froze. I couldn't speak. I just lay there, disconnected from my body, waiting for it to end. When I finally got home, I convinced myself it didn't happen the way I remembered. I didn't tell anyone. I still saw him on campus every week. He smiled like nothing happened. It wasn't until 2 years later, during a group discussion on consent in a seminar, that I finally broke down. I told a professor, then a therapist, eventually a few close friends. I never reported him. I don't think I ever will. But I needed to say it out loud to start healing. People often think trauma looks like screaming or crying, but sometimes it looks like silence and shame. I'm still working through it. Some days are better than others. But at least I'm not pretending it didn't happen anymore. Story 29. I failed out of medical school in my 3rd year. No one saw it coming, not even me. I had always been the smart kid, the one teachers praised and family bragged about. But the pressure built up quietly. I stopped sleeping. I started having panic attacks. I couldn't focus during rounds, and one day, I blanked completely during a patient evaluation. My supervisor pulled me aside and told me I was not fit for clinical work. That sentence shattered me. I was dismissed a few weeks later. I didn't tell anyone for months. I moved back home, lied to people about taking a break, and cried in my room every night. It's taken me years to admit that I couldn't handle it. Not because I wasn't smart enough, but because I didn't ask for help when I needed it. I tied my entire identity to one career, and when it disappeared, I didn't know who I was. I'm rebuilding now, different field, different goals. But that failure still whispers to me sometimes, especially when things get hard. Story 30. My grandmother raised me. She was funny, strict, and full of old stories. She made me feel safe in a world that rarely did. When I was 19, I moved away for college. I promised her I'd visit every break, call every week. But life got busy. I missed calls, cut visits short. When she passed suddenly from a stroke, I hadn't seen her in almost a year. I cried harder than I ever had, not just from grief, but from guilt. She had asked me to come home for her birthday that year. I told her I had too much going on. I'll never forget the voicemail she left saying, "I know you're busy, baby, but I miss you." I still have it saved. I listen to it when I feel lost. People always say, they knew you loved them. I hope she did, but I'll always wish I made more time. No amount of success or busyness is worth missing those moments. I learned that too late. Story 31. I lost my virginity to someone I didn't love, and I've regretted it ever since. I was 19, and all my friends had already done it. I felt like I was falling behind, like being a virgin made me less of an adult. So when this guy I barely knew from a party showed interest, I said yes. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't special. It was awkward, rushed, and over before I fully realized what was happening. I smiled afterward, pretending everything was okay. But I cried in the shower that night. Not because it hurt physically, but because I felt like I had betrayed myself. I wish I had waited, not for marriage, but for connection. For someone who cared about me, not just my body. Now, years later, I've had healthier experiences, but sometimes I still think about that night and feel a little hollow. They say your first time doesn't have to be perfect, and that's true. But it should at least feel safe, respected, and wanted. Mine didn't. Story 32. I used to post risque photos online for money. It started during college when bills piled up and my part-time job wasn't cutting it. I told myself it was just temporary, that it wasn't a big deal. And honestly, it wasn't the work that bothered me. It was how people treated me. The compliments felt hollow. The messages were invasive. Some users acted like they owned me because they sent $20. But the worst part? When someone from my hometown found my page and shared it around. Overnight, I became that girl in my community. People I'd known for years suddenly looked at me differently. A few classmates reached out pretending to be supportive, only to ask for free content. I shut everything down and moved cities. I'm not ashamed of how I survived, but I resent the judgment. Nobody talks about how hard it is to choose between paying rent and preserving your reputation. I did what I had to do, and if I had to, I would do it again. But I wish people could see the person behind the pictures. Story 33. I had an affair with a married man when I was 25. I didn't know at first. He told me he was separated. We dated for months. I met his roommate, who was actually his wife, and he introduced her as his cousin. I didn't find out until his wife messaged me directly. She was calm, too calm. She didn't attack me. She thanked me for confirming what she had suspected. I was devastated. I ended it immediately, blocked him, and apologized to her. But the shame didn't leave. I kept replaying conversations in my head, wondering how I missed the signs. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but I did. People see stories like mine and assume I was a homewrecker. But I was just someone who wanted love and got manipulated into being part of someone else's betrayal. It taught me to ask more questions, to trust my gut. I'm still healing from the guilt. I never saw him again, but I think about his wife often. Her grace that day stayed with me more than anything he ever said. Story 34. I was in a long-distance relationship where we relied heavily on virtual intimacy. At first, it was exciting, video calls, late-night messages, sending each other private photos. But over time, it became performative. He started requesting things that made me uncomfortable, and I said yes because I didn't want him to lose interest. It felt like if I didn't keep up the fantasy, I'd lose the relationship altogether. Eventually, I felt like I was performing for someone, rather than connecting with them. The final straw was when one of the private videos I sent somehow got leaked. I never found out how, and he denied sharing it. But the trust was gone. I left the relationship not just heartbroken, but violated. To this day, I'm careful about what I share, even in committed relationships. I have nothing against long-distance love or virtual intimacy, but I learned the hard way that boundaries matter, and that no should always be respected, even when it's digital. Story 35. I once had a partner who used sex as a weapon. He'd withhold affection when we fought, then turn around and demand it when things smoothed over, like intimacy was a reward I had to earn. At first, I thought this was just a phase. Then I realized it was control. He'd say things like, "If you really loved me, you'd do this," or "You're not sexy when you act like that." It messed with my head. I began questioning my worth, my desirability, even my sanity. I stayed longer than I should have, thinking I could fix it. When I finally left, I didn't date anyone for over a year. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was scared I'd never feel safe being vulnerable again. I've since learned that real intimacy isn't transactional. It's not something that should ever be used to manipulate or punish. Now I only share that part of myself with someone who makes me feel safe, emotionally, physically, and mentally. And that's something I'll never compromise again. Story 36. I once caught my partner cheating, not through texts or rumors, but in person. I came home early from a weekend trip and found him in bed with someone else. They both froze like characters in a bad movie. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there staring while my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I left without saying a word. Later, he tried to explain, said he was lonely, that it just happened. But betrayal doesn't need a reason. It just hurts. What made it worse was that he had always accused me of being too distant, too guarded. Turns out, I had every right to be. For months afterward, I questioned everything, my looks, my worth, my entire sense of self. But eventually, I realized his actions were about him, not me. Some people cheat because they're broken in ways they refuse to admit. That experience taught me to trust my instincts, to protect my peace, and to never stay where I'm not respected. I deserve more. We all do. Story 37. I had a friend with benefits situation that almost ruined a great friendship. We had known each other since high school, same friend group, inside jokes, late-night talks. One night, after too many drinks, we hooked up. We both agreed it was no big deal and kept doing it. But it changed things. I started catching feelings, and he didn't. Or maybe he did, but he was too scared to admit it. Either way, the dynamic shifted. I started overanalyzing texts, wondering who else he was seeing, getting jealous over things I had no right to be jealous about. Eventually, we had a huge fight. He said I knew the deal, and I said he led me on. We didn't talk for a year after that. We've since reconnected, and things are friendly again, but not the same. That period taught me that casual doesn't mean simple. When emotions get involved, lines blur fast. And if you're not having honest conversations, someone's going to get hurt. In this case, it was me. Story 38. I dated someone with a high-profile social media presence. He was charming, funny, and always on. His followers adored him. But behind the scenes, he was possessive, insecure, and constantly accused me of trying to steal his spotlight. He'd delete my comments on his posts, forbid me from posting certain photos, and once told me to change my hairstyle because it made me look too confident. I stayed because I thought I was helping him, keeping him grounded. But really, I was shrinking myself to fit into his version of love. The relationship ended when he publicly accused me of cheating, to gain sympathy from his followers. One post, and suddenly I was getting hate messages from strangers. I had to deactivate all my accounts. It took months to rebuild my self-esteem. Fame doesn't make someone kind, and sometimes the persona people show online is just a mask. I learned to trust actions over aesthetics, and I'll never date someone who needs to dim my light to feel bright. Story 39. I once worked in the adult entertainment industry, not on camera, but behind the scenes as a writer for scripts and promotional material. I didn't tell most people because the stigma was overwhelming. When I finally opened up to a close friend, they ghosted me. Just disappeared. I guess the idea that I was connected to that world made them uncomfortable. But the truth is, I learned a lot in that job about consent, boundaries, desire, and communication. More than I ever learned in school. I saw how performers supported one another, how safety was prioritized, and how much effort went into ethical production. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I left the industry after 2 years, but the judgment stayed. Even when I applied for jobs later, I had to decide whether to hide that part of my history. I'm not ashamed of what I did. I'm proud of the people I worked with. But I wish society didn't reduce us to stereotypes. There's humanity in every profession, especially the ones people pretend not to watch. Story 40. I was in a relationship where our intimate life slowly died. At first, we were passionate, couldn't keep our hands off each other. But as time passed, he lost interest. He stopped initiating, stopped responding. I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't attractive anymore. Maybe I was too clingy. I tried everything, new outfits, date nights, open communication. Nothing worked. He'd say he was tired, stressed, or just not in the mood. Months went by, then over a year. We became roommates who kissed occasionally. I felt invisible, unwanted. Eventually, I found out he was struggling with undiagnosed depression and body image issues of his own. We both suffered in silence, too ashamed to admit what was really happening. We ended things gently. No fights, just mutual exhaustion. I wish we had been more honest from the beginning. Intimacy isn't just about sex, it's about being seen. And when you go too long without that, you start to forget your own reflection.